Shortly after I was ordained a priest, my grandmother, whom I was extremely close to, died quite unexpectedly. And as with many families, there are many dynamics at work, and it seems that during very stressful times, especially during a death, these dynamics surface in a very pronounced way. My grandfather had asked me if I would help him with the arrangements for my grandmother's funeral, as I would be the one celebrating the funeral mass. And I said, absolutely. And knowing some of the dynamics at work within my family, I encouraged my grandfather that some of the other family members should be at the meeting with the funeral director. And he agreed. All things considered, all went well, or so I thought. And fast forward to nearly 10 years later, my grandfather dies, and we're sitting around the same table with the funeral director once again. The family dynamics surface, and I learned that a family member has been angry with me for nearly 10 years about the church that was used for my grandmother's funeral. This family member held on to that anger for nearly 10 years. And at this point, I was receiving the wrath of this individual. First reading from the book of Sirach says, "Wrath and anger are hateful things, yet the sinner hugs them tight." We are all sinners, and yet for some reason, perhaps from our fallen nature, we as human beings hold on to anger and wrath. We don't like to let it go, and yet it drains our energy. We fixate on things that make us angry, and in some cases, these things consume us. We can lose sight of who we are and what we are called to do by Jesus himself as Catholic Christians. Jesus is very clear in the gospel for today. We have a choice. We have a choice to forgive or not to forgive. But Jesus is also very clear that if we do not forgive, how can we expect our Heavenly Father to forgive us? In order to be forgiven by God, then we must forgive those who have trespassed against us. As human beings, forgiveness is difficult. It can make us very uncomfortable because it's hard to do. I was preaching on forgiveness once before in a parish far, far away from here. Someone came up to me after Mass and said, "You know, Father, forgiveness is not about being a doormat." And I responded back and I said, "I couldn't agree with you more. Forgiveness is not about being a doormat. It's not saying, 'Wrong me again.' We all recognize that to forgive is hard. It is a process. And as Christians, we are called to forgive one another. One way to begin the process of forgiveness and healing when we are wronged or even perceived to be wronged is to communicate with one another. Going back to the family member who was upset with me, they perceived that I had wronged them. And all it was a simple miscommunication. Someone didn't hear what was said. Someone made something out of nothing. 10 years of anger, energy spent on something that could have been cleared up in 10 seconds. Today we are reminded by Jesus himself about one of the most difficult but most important aspects of our Christian lives: to forgive or not to forgive. The choice is ours. But don't we all desire and want God's forgiveness, which He so freely gives to us, so long as we forgive others?